Hey guys, Pater Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. I recently played around 6 hours of a video game called The Last Oricru, developed by Gold Knights and published by Prime Matter, and I want to thank the developer for supplying me with a copy of the game for review. The Last Oricru is a Souls-like action RPG that aims to also be accessible to players who don't want an unforgiving experience and may primarily be interested in the story. Among other descriptive details for the game at lastoricru.com is the following. The Last Oricru is an action RPG with a strong emphasis on storytelling and player choices. The player is awakening in a sci-fi medieval world at a time of war and starts influencing the destiny of the whole nation. The game is designed as both single-player and a co-op experience. You can play split-screen co-op. I didn't explore this at all, so the details of the co-op experience, unfortunately, you'll have to find elsewhere. I just tried out the single-player experience. Among its main features listed on their website is challenging combat, where they say the combat is complex and aims to create a tough but rewarding experience. You will encounter various mass fights in which you can influence already raging battles, take down enemy soldiers, or come to their aid. Melee and ranged attacks, elemental damage or magic, and weight management offers a wide range of customization. Be prepared to die a lot, which that last statement there was like, ooh, I don't know. I want to be clear that I'm giving my reactions to this game from a very specific perspective that fans of challenging games will likely not be able to relate to. So if you want to turn me off and move on, I would totally understand. I do not play games for challenge, but to explore and interact with interesting worlds while enjoying a power fantasy. I don't mind difficulty pushing back at me now and then if there's an option for me to grind for ability and stat improvement, and if that grind is in itself interesting instead of monotonous. I have become more open to slower and more deliberate combat controls in recent years, playing games like Monster Hunter World and Elix 1 and 2, but I still don't like that to be combined with my character having great vulnerability to enemy damage or other forms of sudden death. The Last Oricru includes a story difficulty option for players who want less challenge in order to be able to focus on and experience the story, and that's the mode I played in for my review. So let's start by getting straight to that difficulty mode and what I experienced. I've mostly been sticking to melee combat, which for the first 3 hours was not much fun for me. It took me a while to figure out hitboxes, or in other words, like where on the enemy model you needed to hit and make contact in order for it to count as, you know, hitting them and doing damage. So figuring out where those spots were on the models for the enemies, for myself, took a little while. I felt like some hits should have counted, others shouldn't have, and along those lines I eventually found the lock-on system that allows you to lock on to an enemy to be almost vital in order for my hits to predictably make contact. But once I got the hang of locking on and timing my attacks, timing my dodges a little better, combat did become easier and more satisfying. And it also helped a lot that I chose to grind for about, I would say, 30 minutes or so in the first area after the tutorial area. I used a respawn terminal. There's terminals that you recurringly discover in the world that give you access to leveling up and various other features, and also when you interact with them they repopulate the surrounding area with enemies. And so using those terminals to repopulate the areas and to restore my health and my healing potions and stuff was what I used to kind of do that grinding. And in that 30 minutes, I not only benefited from static increases to my stats, but those increases unlocked access to a passive fire damage buff on my weapon that I needed to have my stats at a certain level to reach. And so I gained multiple levels in the space of 30 minutes. So I was getting to know in that time how to dodge, how to land blows more effectively, while also increasingly taking less damage and dealing more with each hit because of my stat improvement, because of the weapon ability unlock I was able to reach. it was a nice steady feeling of progression in that time and power growth that better positioned me for the first big boss fight, which ended up being a lot less difficult than I feared it would be. And I think also better positioned me to just in general move forward in the game and not feel so vulnerable all the time. So if you play The Last Oricru and are finding story difficulty more challenging than you'd like, I'd recommend you find a terminal in that first big castle area after the tutorial area that you start in, and then grind combat near that terminal with nearby enemies, so that if you die, the XP you drop at the location of your death, which is kind of a standard thing in a lot of Souls games, can be easily recollected when you respawn, so that you still can take it to the terminal and spend it for upgrades. It's also helpful to know that, at least on story mode, your allotment of health potions is restored every time you interact with a terminal or respawn at one. It's not... You don't have like a bunch of consumable potions. It's more like, I'm trying to think of like a Path of Exile, where you have maybe 3 potion bottles, and you just keep drinking those potions and emptying them, and then they get refilled by, going to a save point or something like that. And so in this case, they are refilled when you interact with a terminal. And you start with 2, and then I've gained 1 within the first 6 hours, so I'm up to 3 now. So you can't really be spamming those a lot, but they are useful, and they do get refilled every time you interact with a terminal. So I found that the grinding experience is very doable. Very. You can start a grinding experience really early on. Oops, it's the tyranny of my timer's going off. I got to do some laundry. Anyway, yeah. So I also played around just a little bit with magic to explore a ranged attack option, but I'm not confident that it's for me. There are no consumables for restoring mana either, and it instead has to be drained from foes up close and personal. So if I have to get close now and then to enemies anyway, I'd rather stick with dependable, unexhaustible melee damage, and the better armor that tends to go with that kind of loadout. Changing up equipment and your fighting style is pretty easy. In addition to having 2 sets of weapons available to switch between on the fly, you can carry as many alternate pieces of equipment with you as you'd like, since only equipped items, armor, weapons, things like that, counts against your encumbrance limits. It's as if you have a backpack that makes everything weightless when you put stuff into it, and it's only when you are wearing it that it counts against your weight. And there's a system of these stat swapping rings that allow you to move points from one stat to another. So you can optimize stats for magic when you have those kinds of items equipped that require, better magic stats. And you can optimize strength and dexterity stats when you have, say, a melee loadout equipped through this system of rings that you can equip. It's an interesting concept. Loot is found pretty frequently, and I found either equipment or materials from 1 out of every 2 to 3 enemies, as well as items and materials from smashable objects in the environment you can later use to upgrade equipment at terminals. Items can also be broken down for raw crafting materials, and when you visit one of the terminals throughout the game, which function like bonfires in Souls games, they're not save points. There's an autosave system that's frequently autosaving, and you can save anytime you exit to the menu. But like the Souls games, you're using them to do your character upgrading, things like that. So when you visit one of these terminals through the game, you also reset the world so that you can fight enemies again for more loot, more components. So I always had the sense of progressing in terms of XP, equipment, money, or crafting components. And you can also convert XP into gold, into currency at these terminals if you prefer, giving you some nice control over your progression and adding to that feeling of every fight being worthwhile in some way. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the technical issues in the game and just the overall polished quality of life type stuff. I wanted to provide this review earlier, but an issue at launch prevented the developers from being able to include the option to invert Y for the camera until just recently, a feature that I just plain need if I want to have any chance at enjoying a game. In general, there is still, these weeks after the release, some quality of life and polish lacking. For graphics, there are no quality or performance settings, just a gamma slider option, and camera sensitivity adjustment seems either limited to the X-axis or combines both X and Y. It leaves me wishing at the end of the day that I could adjust the Y-axis sensitivity. I feel like that is where it's like, oh, the camera's moving faster than I'd like, and adjusting the camera sensitivity option doesn't seem to have an effect specifically on that. In some menus and log entries, not a ton, but frequent enough to be worth mentioning. The text will be cut off, almost like something that happened when they were adjusting the point size or something, bringing it to consoles. I don't know exactly what might cause it, but some text will be cut off, leaving me to kind of guess at missing words. Quest goals in your log provide a single sentence description only that I've seen so far, but no reminders of the helpful details you may have been given in dialogue from the character who gave you the quest. And in some cases, I didn't even see a quest goal in my log for what I needed to do next to progress the story. So I can really imagine being frustrated and lost a lot if I take breaks of any length from this game, and maybe even if I don't. There's also no map or compass, which wasn't always an issue, as you kind of, it seems so far, get to know one big area at a time through exploring it and really kind of thoroughly fighting enemies and doing all that you can there before the story unlocks a new area. So it's not always a big issue, but I did spend at least 15 minutes trying to figure out simply how to leave a main area once I'd been given permission to do so. So at times it felt frustrating and became a drag on my enjoyment. The visuals involve some blurry textures in a number of places, making it feel to me like an Xbox 360 game that was up-resed and ported to PS4, and I'm playing a native PS5 version. That said, visual design is more important to me than resolution and fidelity, and so far the blend of dark fantasy and science fiction is growing on me, both in terms of the visual aesthetic, and of course I just love that genre-bending concept. And that's nice because I enjoy the look of the world and the ideas the different designs suggest, but I'm almost completely lost and uninterested when it comes to the story and the characters. Facial animations are very blank and wooden. The voice acting is, it's not monotone, it's inflected, it has ups and downs, but feels very one-note emotionally, with a main protagonist who doesn't seem the least bit genuinely concerned about his circumstances, instead making casual jokes and meta-references that pull the rug out of any sense of weight and stakes in the story for me. It's just kind of like this almost kind of a sing-songy kind of approach to the performance. Both the writing and the performance really make me feel like the main character is always just kind of taking a pleasant stroll through the park with a happy melody constantly playing in his head, and that's not really what I need to engage me in the stakes and in the story. I want some weightiness to it. And there is very little context provided for the world and what is happening in it. There is a conflict between two factions that you're dropped in the middle of, but your character has amnesia with no idea who you are, what your mission is. You kind of get the sense that you have a mission to fulfill, but you don't really know what that mission is. And I'm lacking so many details about the world and who my character is and what I'm there for that it really just becomes about, engaging with the combat, loot, and character progression systems while moving through the environments in terms of what draws me into the game or keeps me interested in it. So are the systems, the combat, and visual designs enough to keep me engaged? Not at the moment. It's not that I'm disliking my experience at this point. At first I was. But as I said, the visual setting grew on me, and I started to get the hang of the combat to the point where it started getting satisfying. But I just have other games that I will more predictably and instantly enjoy when I, start into playing them. That said, the small team at Gold Knights showed great ambition with this game, and they are hard at work supporting it, ironing things out, and even in its current state, I have to say, it's the first Souls-like game I've played that has me feel like there might finally be an enjoyable entry point for me to this genre. So at this point, I plan to set it aside and let some time pass in hopes that if and when I come back to it later, it will have a few more kinks ironed out, and there will be some player-created guides online to allow for a smoother experience progressing through the game. Now, I always try to look for interesting themes. Is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance going on in the entertainment that I'm taking in that might trigger some worthwhile thought or conversation? So I was keeping an eye out for that here. In the conflict between the first two factions that you meet, there is clearly a theme of slavery and racism. But it's not completely cut and dry. The race being enslaved is clearly being victimized, but also can't be said to be completely innocent. So there may be something with moral nuance there to explore as I get to know the world more assuming that's going to happen if I continue through the game. As I said earlier, there are so many details about the world, about the story that aren't presented, making it hard for me to really engage with the setting, story, and as a result, its potential themes. But anyway, those are all of my thoughts for now on The Last Oricru. Are you a Souls-like fan that tried The Last Oricru? I would be really curious to hear your perspective. And then, as always, I'd love it if you check out the Christian Geek Central podcast and all the other stuff you can access at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth.